Welcome. I'm Matt Leininger. I run the Democracy Innovation Project at the National Conference on Citizenship. Welcome to our webinar that explores the landscape of civic measurement. We have some excellent people here to kind of help talk about this, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But first, before I do that, I just want to let you know that we are indeed recording. You have probably just seen the screen. And so therefore you will be getting, if you registered, you will be getting a email back from us that includes a link to the recording. Feel free to share that with people that you know who couldn't make it. We actually have 400 people signed up for today's webinar. So I'm not sure how many of them will actually show up, but we're a little surprised by how exciting civic measurement seems to be. But because of that crowd, we'll have some difficulty, I think, interacting with all of you, but please feel free to put questions in the chat whenever they occur to you. We'll be monitoring those and we'll be gathering them up closer to the end of the hour, and we will all try to kind of address the questions that we see there as we get them. So please feel free to use that. Let me just start by kind of telling you a little bit about the people we have with us. We have Joe Hoereth, who is the director of the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who's been doing measurement in various ways in the Chicago, in the state of Illinois, and farther afield for many years. And we have been talking about measurement questions for a long time. Jeff Coates is the research director for the National Conference on Citizenship and has been running the Civic Health Index for at least 8 years now. And he can tell you more about, say a little bit more about the CHI. And then Debi Ghate, who's been my partner in crime. Debi is on this report. Debi runs Steadfast, an organization, and also is an executive fellow for the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. And the Institute for Citizens and Scholars they're the publishers of this report that Debi and I were part of writing. So that's a quick intro on who the people are. And first, we're just going to give you kind of a rapid run through of the report itself. Let me see if I can share my screen, and there we go. So what we did here with this report was we first just tried to gather as many tools as we could find. And I want to acknowledge Anna Gallo, who I think is in the crowd here, who was an intrepid and friendly and persistent tool finder. She and we gathered over 200 measurement tools. We kind of used a bunch of interviews to find tools. We also did a lit review, and the interviews we did, which were about 70 of them, were incredibly helpful, not just for finding the tools, but to helping us figure out how to categorize them, to figure out what are these things what are these tools actually trying to measure. And through that kind of conversation, we eventually realized we were looking at two big categories, and these became the two maps or wheels that are kind of the center of this whole report. One is the map that shows civic readiness, the various ways in which the things that citizens believe, understand, connect, and do and participate. And so that became one of kind of the two big categories. And then the other was the map of civic opportunities in communities that help people learn how to do these things, learn what they should be understanding, believing, participating, and connecting. So those are the kind of the big kind of framework behind the report as a whole. Then we kind of also kind of had to figure out kind of, well, actually, I want to say one more thing. In the kind of initial formulation, understand, believe, connect, and participate, connect was actually not there at the beginning, but it was something that emerged. The more that we talked to people, the more that we found different tools. And a lot of people made the case that the ways in which people, or the skills people have for connecting with one another to solve problems and make decisions, are really important to citizenship and public life today. And then, so as you look at these wheels and you go farther toward the outskirts of them, you find the more kind of specific things, the specific categories that things people are trying to measure. We should emphasize that neither of these wheels they're not our formulations for what citizenship should be or what civic opportunities each community should offer. We started with what people are measuring. So we started from that kind of level and kind of moved backward to figure out, okay, if you look at what they're measuring, figure out how to kind of categorize and arrange those things, what emerges is kind of a picture of citizenship and a picture of communities. that people are kind of interested in trying to kind of uphold. So the next slide kind of shows that we feel like these two wheels are in kind of a symbiotic kind of relationship, that people learn skills, they get knowledge about citizenship and various things. They have opportunities to practice those things in their communities, learn them, refine those tools and skills. What they do with those skills are, of course, important and helpful for their communities, and also in turn then provide them new opportunities to refine the skills and for other people to learn and refine the skills. So it should be something where it goes back and forth. And that is something that a lot of people are very interested in measuring and are just trying to grapple with figuring out how to do it.
Hi, Matt. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're just getting a few comments about this. Could you go ahead and go into presenter mode on the slide?
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
Go ahead and, yeah, right there.
Good.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you for pointing that out. So then what we did, we had these great wheels, and we took all the tools that we had gathered and pinned them, to the different parts of the wheels that we feel that they're measuring. And so what you see on the right here is this big, enormous table, which kind of lists in alphabetical order all of the tools that we found and kind of where they got pinned. And sometimes they're actually measuring multiple things, so they appear in multiple places on the two maps, the two wheels. One important distinction to make is that what we have been gathering and what we then pinned are tools themselves, not the data sets, right? So these are surveys, these are rubrics, these are other sometimes qualitative forms of assessment, rather than the data sets on which they are relying. So, for example, the census is a data set that the Civic Health Index is based on. We aren't listing the census or the different kind of surveys connected to the census. We are actually listing the CHI as the tool which appears on the list. NSOLV is another example. NSOLV is a national study of learning, voting, and engagement, which uses the voter rolls to compare people's civic attitudes and their civic duties, whether they're voting and so on and so forth. But that's a data set and a particular tool for using it. So let me kind of move along. And I think now, let me turn it over to Debi for you to say a little bit more about the findings that occurred to us as we looked at what we'd created.
Thank you, Matt. And hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many faces joining us for this conversation for National Civic Learning Week. And I'm actually in the Institute for Citizens and Scholars office today, and a bunch of my colleagues are watching around the corner. So I just want to say hi to them quickly. Hello. All right, so on to the findings. So the first finding is that civic readiness is being measured much more than civic opportunities. What we did is we took every single measurement tool, there were over 200 of them, and we pinned them to the map. And this is a way for us to see how the work was being distributed. When we did that, I think you can see pretty easily that there's many more dots on the left map than there are on the right map. So civic readiness is being measured far more frequently and extensively than civic opportunities. All right, so that is finding one. And then Matt, if I can get you to move to the next slide. All right, finding two. There are notable gaps that exist among people doing measurement work, as well as the kinds of tools available. So it became clear to us, not only from the process of categorizing and pinning tools, but from the many interviews and conversations that we had with people convening, that there are disconnects between different sets of measurers, different groups of people who are doing this work. So just as some of our colleagues in civic learning speak of civic deserts, where people have inadequate access to opportunities, there are also civic measurement deserts where readiness and opportunities are not being measured yet. So that was the second finding, is that there are these gaps. All right, so let's move on to finding three. Finding three, voting dominates the civic learning measurement world. Now, a review of the tools shows that many people have focused and concentrated on voter participation, which in a way is not a surprise because there are political and methodological reasons for doing that. It's something that's easy to measure, it can be quantified, it can be validated at scale. So while it wasn't a surprise to most people that this was the case, there are maybe some unintended consequences and some implications here that came up in our conversations. The first is a focus on measuring voting might oversimplify, confuse, or dilute the many other important elements that are on the map that go into measuring civic readiness. So that's one. The second, this kind of focus might actually make it more difficult to effectively assess voting itself, because studies show that the willingness to vote is dependent on other factors, connections to trusted people, your family, your friends, the networks that you have. And so what are the influence of those connections and networks? And if those can be impacted in a positive way, does this strengthen voter education and other civic opportunities? So we paused on this one a little bit because it was such a dramatic finding. And it does raise some interesting questions for how resources might be allocated in the future. All right, so finding 4. There are varying definitions for what good citizenship means, all of which need examining as our world is changing. And this we affectionately called the pizza map. As we were talking to people, it became apparent that different groups have different definitions for what they even mean by citizenship. And of course, that is going to impact which aspects of the maps people are trying to measure and why they're measuring them. And there can be some very different definitions of citizenship, from Aristotelian to like a global view. And on top of that, we live in a world of massive technological, social, and political change. So we did hear agreement that the traditional measures of citizenship may be out of step with current civic realities. So for example, skills and knowledge outside of the classroom are relevant to how citizens get things done. And that technology is changing quickly and creating shifts, and we're just beginning to study the relationship between technology and citizenship. So there's a need for the research to keep pace. And then third, there was general dissatisfaction. I don't think this will be a surprise, general dissatisfaction with the current state. And at the same time, no real consensus about what role citizens can play or should play in changing this. So this makes it hard to understand what the targets for measurement are. So those were the 4 key findings. And in the report itself, which my colleague Anna Gallus dropped the link in the chat, so you can actually download the report, we lay out what decisions need to be made as a result of those conditions. So some other items that we noted, I don't think this will be a surprise to those who are working in the space. First, we are working in a hyper-polarized environment. Second, there is this sense that the field has become dominated by certain ideological viewpoints and agendas. The third is that efforts are scattered. They're scattered across various disciplines. Sometimes there's even conflicting frameworks. Again, this dissatisfaction with public life and institutions. And then, no matter who we talked to, there were concerns about the power imbalances between authorities and citizens, and about how to protect individual rights while thriving together in communities. And in various ways and in very different words, people were expressing that. So we believe this landscape report may provide a unifying framework that speaks across all of these challenges. So our call to action, which I believe is the next slide, is that we need to take these different measurement approaches and be coordinated so we can understand our overall progress. And moving forward, we need to do more than just refine our methodologies or marshal resources. We really need to bring together truly diverse practitioners and researchers and funders to engage with one another, share best practices, and work on some shared goals. And the goals that we think could be some of these shared goals: first, define citizenship and civic readiness in a way that speaks across all of those different groups. Second, we do need to evaluate the efficacy of the existing tools. Do the tools do what they say they do, or that they think they do? So evaluating that. And then, as we saw, there are a lot of gaps. So filling in the gaps. And then what is the relationship between these two wheels? There isn't a lot of study of that yet. And so there's a real opportunity there. And then this one that a lot of people raised, and in very, very different ways, the relationship between equity, opportunity, and civic infrastructure, which is something that a lot of people have strong views about and debate. So what is the actual relationship, and can we study that? So that's our call to action in terms of the next steps. And we're excited. Matt and I are excited to work with you, all of you, on the next phase of this work. There will be a resource hub eventually where you can access the measurement tools, and some of them are on our website now at Institute for Citizens and Scholars. And then we will be doing more knowledge sharing convenings like this and bringing people together to continue these conversations and actually get into some of these hard questions that we mentioned. So Matt, I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. And so let me turn to you, Joe, as somebody who's been doing this work for a while, both kind of, creating your own measurement tools of various kinds and also kind of keeping track of what other people were doing. I'm just kind of curious to get your overall take of whether we're kind of making progress here, whether we're moving forward in kind of to more of a comprehensive approach to measuring civic readiness and civic opportunities. Please say yes. But please also say, if you're saying yes, kind of what you think we need to do next to kind of move forward.
Well, thanks, Matt. If I say no, are you going to kick me off?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I have to say yes, sure. And that's not just because, Matt, I know you well and like you. There's a lot of good reason to say that. And this report, in my opinion, is really kind of a giant leap forward in this space. First, I just want to commend you all and the researchers and everybody involved. As someone who's, as you mentioned, we worked on trying to create our own, or a measurement, I should say, of civic infrastructure. And when you're kind of starting out with that, even if you are aware of work that's being done out there, you really do need to do some homework. And until we had this report, these tools, this research and this work was very far afield and like disconnected, disparate. So I think one of the first sort of aspects of that giant step is having this report compile this stuff in a very accessible way that isn't just a list, right? So you all have gone through, you've chewed through these, you've given us some kind of framework for thinking about like what these measures mean. And I think that leads us to the second real kind of accomplishment or movement that this report represents for us in this space, which is, Debi just alluded to this, building the foundation of a shared language. This problem, Debi, that you highlighted, that you all heard from individuals you spoke to, it's a significant challenge when you're working in this space. For all of us who are working, either trying to collaborate or work with each other or trying to work with our communities, many of us are meaning exactly the same thing, but using very different language for it. And therefore, what should be obvious connections in our work get missed or dismissed, or just people don't know, or they're not aware. And so having a space where somebody has sort of brought things together and said, at least here's what we mean, and we interpret a similarity between that and what others mean. Other tangibles from this report, I think the compilation of the tools in the like, I like appendices and I read appendices. I know most of the world isn't like that, but gosh, there's a ton of valuable information in the appendices here that I think all of us have things in there that we want to follow up on or read or weren't even aware of. And that leads me to one challenge that I think this report, but also becoming aware that how extensive this field is of folks who are doing the similar work gives me some hope. I think I have a real fear of low quality civic engagement kind of ruining it for everybody. I'll just say that in my simplest language. The hard work of well-designed, research-informed, well-executed, thoughtful efforts can be threatened just by someone who just kind of, or efforts that just kind of do that, similar thing, maybe without all that background, and end up not doing it well. And then folks who have participated are turned off, and maybe we don't get them back, or maybe it's utilized to feed a cynicism that was already there, or a frustration that's sort of snowballing, right? And we have got to turn that around. We really have to, in that civic opportunity space, really create meaningful opportunities. And so, Matt, your second part of your question as to what we need to do next, I mean, I feel like that's where we need to go now. The report showed a ton of work being done around measuring civic readiness and civic learning, and that's great. And so, when, now that we know a lot about people sort of being ready to be informed, engaged citizens, what's out there for them to do? What's different now, right? We really aren't going to change much if our civic infrastructure isn't generating those opportunities. And so that's what the measure we tried to develop is focusing on, that participate quarter of the wheel, the resource wheel, in those civic opportunities. And so, one question is, do we have those measures at all? And then, are we able to measure the quality of these efforts? And that's important as well. And the efforts need to either be leading towards some change or contributing to it and have some impact. Measuring that is difficult. And so the work in this space is really cut out for us. The challenges are many and significant.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of what we hope, your point about quality is really important. And also, one of the things that's confusing about our work generally is that many of these things can have multiple outcomes. If you're engaging people in public life, yes, they might be learning better skills for making decisions together, or solving problems together, critical thinking. They might also be simply learning more about how government works. And being able to do that in a real context in a community program might be even more, impactful than people getting taught about it in school. That's a supposition, but basically what we want to be able to do is spin these wheels, or help people spin these wheels, so that they can kind of connect, look at the relationships from different sorts of civic opportunities and different sorts of civic readiness. So that makes sense to me. And I think you're right that the ultimate measure here, or the most important in my mind, is, what do people think? Are they satisfied, with the civic opportunities they have? And all the ways we can measure that would be great. Jeff, you have kind of been, husbanding kind of one of the most high-profile measures out there, the Civic Health Index. It's been going on for a number of years, and it's using basically the ultimate of all data sets, I think, the census, to kind of understand people's civic attitude. So I'd love you to say a little bit about what the CHI is, but also, more importantly, I think, how are people using it, or how people should be using the CHI and other sorts of measurement tools to actually improve, civic readiness and civic opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Great question. I appreciate that. The Civic Health Index has been around since 2008 with the passing of the Edward Kennedy Serve America Act, and the National Conference on Citizenship, NCoC, has a relationship with AmeriCorps, and I believe Dr. Mary Hyde's on, and she is a wonderful colleague who has championed this for a while in actually funding the collection of the Volunteering and Civic Life supplement, which we utilize to do our Civic Health Index reports. We've done actually over 90 reports in 20 nations or 20 national reports and 62 state reports in over about 30 states. We're trying to get in every state. But this data and the reports that come out of it, the CHI reports, are not just data for data's sake, or report for report's sake and sit on a shelf. They've actually we've evolved in how those reports are being written by our partners. that have actually advocated and developed recommendations in every report to say we need change to move this needle in civic education, or we in voter registration, or social connections. There's 21 indicators that we use in this report. So there's the ability to tell a lot of different compelling stories. And since we've had data since 2008, we have the longitudinal look, we have the ability to look. And getting to your question is, how can our partners use it and how do other people use this? Is, a great example is how is the Lou Fry Institute in Florida. They utilized this data showing Florida had a very low civic education, civic involvement at one point, and Lou Fry Institute, Doug Dobson there, put the report on every legislator's desk prior to the passing of the St. O'Connor Act. That was huge. It was passed. Now they have that. They have K through 12 civic education. Well, that model was actually brought to Illinois from our partner Sean Healy, who is now at iCivics, and they were able to. They're moving towards and doing some civic education in Illinois. And one of the most current partners, Indiana, the Indiana Bar Foundation and Charles Dunlap, a couple of years ago, they showed that Indiana is always ranked quite low in voter participation and in generic voter turnout and civic education turnouts. Issues like, voting at local levels or in local elections, to attending public meetings or connecting to your, public officials, or, just in general, basic social connections. So what they did at the state level, the governor actually produced or developed a state task force for civic learning. And that started probably 2 or 3 years ago and is now evolving. Our partners and others, yes, like you said, we have the 20,000 foot view, 40,000 foot view with this data, but combining it with the other data sets that you have found or Joe has found or has developed, combining that tells a wonderful, strong, persuasive story that we need to really focus on civic education in every state, in every community, and provide civic opportunities. There's strong correlation between those that are civically involved and the opportunities they have, the education they can attain, and their age. And, we need to start off young. We need to provide civic opportunities and civic education at the very basic, earliest level and throughout life to ensure that we grow a civically and strong nation. So thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And I want to call out the fact this is a very distinguished crowd here in the chat. If you haven't looked at it yet, the chat's a great discussion happening as we're also speaking verbally here. Lots of people asking questions, answering questions, putting things in different categories, which is great. And we will, the recording, of course, of this will include that. So it's a good thing to look back at if you don't have a chance to look at it now. But I also want to say that this kind of putting together this report, you wouldn't necessarily think of it as something where one needed to navigate political divides and differences, but in fact it is. And we found that was true as we worked on it, that particularly as you use different words, different language to talk about different aspects of citizenship and community, you've got different words that people are using on different sides of the spectrum. But Raj Venkota, I think, was very smart about this. He runs it Citizens and Scholars. And he put me and Debi together to work on this. I have a history of working more in my career with people on probably the left of center, and Debi, you with organizations and people right of center. So I think that during the course of putting this report together, we navigated the language, and we had to kind of really think hard about what things meant to different sets of people and use language we thought would have the most clarity and the most appeal. So I'm just curious, coming out of the experience, what you think about this, about kind of the potential for measuring, the potential for working on measurement as a way of actually helping people deal with political divides in their communities and in the country.
Matt, this has got to be one of my very favorite projects I've ever worked on, partly because of the process that you and I had to go through. If you go towards the end of the report, you'll see that we have definitions for every little, sector of those maps. And it's just a few pages, but those few pages took a long time for us to actually come to be confident and comfortable with. The process, I think, started something like this. It wasn't so hard to get the first three, and then with a lot of input, the four things in the center. The further out we go, the deeper our conversations got. And what we found sometimes is that because we were talking to people from very different sectors, all of whom are doing work that's adjacent to civic learning and actually inputs into the things that are on the maps, sometimes we ourselves were stopping and saying, well, these two sets of sectors call themselves something very different. But when we actually look at, and Joe, this is one of your points, when we actually look deeply at their work and dig into what is it that they are doing and measuring and what do they care about, that common element reveals itself. And that is what we focused on, is digging deep enough to find the common element and then focus on language that didn't belong to anybody, if I could put it that way, but that in plain words tried to explain what it was that this element really was about. So that process was one that I guess illustrates that it takes action in addition to ideas to actually come up with this kind of a framework. And then there was the whole putting it out there in the world and getting a ton of feedback from lots of people. And I got to tell you, Matt, I don't know if I ever said this to you quite this way, but I held my breath a little, because we sent this out to many, many, many different kinds of people from lots of different sectors and asked them, do you see yourself reflected in these maps? Do you see your work reflected in these maps? Is there anything here that you find to be counterproductive to how we might measure? Especially productive. And the feedback really helped us, surface the remaining kinds of issues. And by the end, we had something that everybody came back and said, there is nothing here I disagree with. And I got to tell you that I think was feels like probably one of the big accomplishments. So Matt, yes, I do think there are some implications for bridge building, including the definitions that we've set out here, hopefully provide a starting point for conversation. And then the skills that are required that we are measuring, the way we've described them, those skills are necessary for bridge building. And maybe we've now set up a framework that we can understand how well we are doing at developing those skills. So loved the project, working with you, Matt, especially. Really enjoyed the fact that we had to put it in front of so many different people and really listen to the feedback and sort through it. So I hope that gives you a sense, Matt, of
Absolutely. No, I had a lot of fun as well. And I think I want to bridge this to kind of one of the comments in the chat. Somebody asked about, are there communities that are keeping kind of a good inventory or list of civic opportunities? And I'm sure there must be some out there. And I think Joe and Debbie and Jeff, you may know more. In general, I think this is not something that most communities have. And I can imagine them, using this report perhaps as a starting point, but kind of looking at the different, kinds of things that they have available for people, whether these are students, younger people, older people, whatever. And also kind of both in that process, I think they would kind of things that were happening in different sectors, that this sort of work is not just the province of government. It's not just the province of philanthropy. It's not just about faith institutions. It's about all of those different sectors combined. Higher ed, so on, K-12 school systems. And also, I think that, like you were just saying, that they would find similar things that perhaps were kind of going under different labels, a more right-leaning label, more left-leaning label, but it's really about the same sort of thing, about building character or about building, ways for people to kind of understand their values and communicate their values. So that sort of thing, I think, might be a very healthy exercise and not a terribly difficult thing for communities to do. But I don't. Any thoughts about that, Joe or Jeff, or or Debbie? Any examples you know of where communities have done that?
I think, if I could jump in, Matt, on this one, I think the very fact that you're sort of posing that question speaks to this notion of civic infrastructure, or and to avoid using jargon, I'll define what I mean by that. A set of networks of organizations or institutions that kind of mediate relationships and democratic activity in a community. And if you have a robust set of that, you're in pretty good shape with creating opportunities and quality opportunities. But my question back to you, Matt, would be, what organization in a community would do that, right? Do you have an organization that would even be sort of raising up a level of generality from their sort of day-to-day work and say, hey, wait, what is our system here in our community? What's our little network of this? And if you have an organization who's, I don't know, if you have a university who's a partner and you have people who do that kind of thing, great. But if you don't, do you have an organization that that has that capacity, that can kind of step up and do that? And many communities don't have a presence of an organization that is acting in that way, right? We're all focused on our mission, and we're driven to be mission driven, right? So that's a challenge, and what we need to develop in community to undergird and support civic opportunities.
I would say, and I'm interested in what Debbie, you and Jeff would say, but I mean, my answer to that was one type of place that seems maybe more likely than others to kind of take that on, or maybe should take it on, are community foundations. Because they have this kind of stake in community, they're in it for the long haul. They're kind of above the political fray, and they can convene people across sectors. That the community foundation, could do this sort of work to kind of understand civic opportunities and how it's affecting civic readiness. That seems like a natural fit. But actually, I don't think that should be an excuse for any other organization. That we've got to get out of this trap of each institution thinking about engagement only with its own blinders. The Chamber of Commerce only thinking of it in terms of what it's doing, how it's going to interact with its public, a local government with its public, and the police department, and the so on and so forth. That we all need to realize that this work is done better across sectors. That these different organizations and institutions can help each other, and that together they can reach a much larger and much more diverse set of people than any one on its own. So I think it ought to be as much, that any institution which has this kind of interest ought to be reaching out to other groups, including community foundations, to try to make some of this work.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Matt. I think community foundations are essential and are wonderful institutions. Not every community has them. One thing is public libraries. They should be the hub of where they are, the hub where a lot of people go already, especially low income individuals needing internet access, or a lot of them host wonderful programs, and I think most communities do have public libraries, and they should be partnered with more often. They should be partnered by community foundations if you have. They should be partnered with by universities or community colleges. They should be utilized in a manner that can proliferate what we're talking about. They could collect that information of what's happening. They not just by themselves, but through partnership, they could also host these things. They could bring back civic education to places and states that may not have it in the laws that's necessary. They could do these things in a very nonpartisan way. So yeah, like I said, I think community foundations are wonderful, but they need to be in partnership. And I think public libraries are, to me, the place it should be.
This is so, as you were speaking, I was thinking about all the things that I wish I knew better, you know, how these efforts actually operate and what the impact is. And so let me give you some examples of the kinds of things that pop into my mind that just private citizens are doing on their own, and sort of this civil society, you know, effort that people undertake. So for example, I don't know how many folks on the call are part of their local Buy Nothing group. I am, for sure. It's a lot of fun to meet your neighbors that way. But there are these spontaneous things that happen in a community when people decide that they do have something in common they want to share. They get to know one another. There's a bunch of skills that they put into place, and they get excited. They're happy. It's a commitment that they make to do that. And it doesn't matter what their background is or where they come from ideologically. They seem to have a positive experience with one another. Now, this is a very informal thing that's happening in our communities. How do we even start to capture what the impact of those kinds of efforts are? And so I do think there's probably more happening at a civil society level than we are even imagining right now. And the idea of even how do we understand what's happening, and how do we track the impact of that? Someone's going to have to answer that question. And but it's a question we should ask. Yeah.
Awesome. So there's a couple of things. There's some somewhat more specific questions from the chat. Maybe we can get through a couple of these quickly. One is about whether we distinguish between civic work focused on elections and changes to election systems and civic work on volunteer action or other items that are less political. And I think the answer to that is we tried to list it all. We basically started with what people are measuring and then kind of moved up from there. And so I think we kind of list voting as a part of the ways in which people participate. And so there's certainly, as Debbie was saying, lots and lots of measures of that. And then we didn't kind of bias that or privilege that over other forms of participation. Another person asked about the distinction between data sets and tools, and essentially what we mean there is simply that, you know, that there are these wonderful kind of storehouses of data, and NCoC, I think increasingly over time under Cameron Hickey is going to be more of that sort of support to the civic world, and those are essential. What we were kind of trying to kind of capture and gather were the tools that use those different data sets, and some of them are very small and specific, and some of them are enormous, like the CHI. But basically, we're trying to kind of, you know, distinguish between groups of data and things that try to use those groups of data to kind of create knowledge. And then one other here from a quick one, I think, is actually, I just want to point out that Participedia, which is a wonderful resource that people should check out if you haven't seen it before, is a storehouse of all kinds of things. And yes, Paul will love to have the report and the measures put on Participedia, but what it actually is a large storehouse of methods, examples, and organizations, all related to democracy and engagement in some way or another. So it's another great place to look for different things. One final point, and I'm just trying to hit a bunch of these at once. A couple of people, I think, asked about whether this work kind of looked beyond the US, and the answer is no. For the most part, we've tried to focus our attentions to tools we could find within the US, but we do realize there's a whole lot of stuff happening in a whole lot of other places, and a next version of this, or a much larger version of this report, would actually be a global one, and that would be very interesting and very daunting to try to do. Jeff, Joe, I went through 4 or 5 things there. Any of you want to kind of comment any of that, or other questions that you see hopping up in the chat here?
I guess I'll just touch on one point, the question about the difference between data sets and tools. That's a good one, you know, and sort of an entry point into a conversation about data. Like, good measurements need to be fed by data. And, you know, I'm not sure if we know exactly what kind of data we need to better measure the civic opportunity work. And, what we need to put in place to get that data if we figured that out. So that still feels like a significant challenge, on that front. I think there's a lot of data about individuals, and less about institutions and organizations and networks.
Matt, there's one question here that I think we could answer. Thank you to our participants for partially answering it already. This is about whether
Good
there is
job,
a
easy.
reference to values in the report. And yes, there are values listed in the civic readiness wheels. There is a believe element in the inner ring. And the way we defined that was shared values, a dedication to understanding different perspectives, finding shared goals, and working to achieve them. So we have had a values element, and then we also have reflective patriotism, a commitment to country, and an ability to both uphold and critique American institution and ideals. So yes, there is an attempt for us to bring in values, and of course, if you think we've missed something, we would love to hear that.
Joe or Jeff, want to jump in any of these? I think another one, which I think is somewhat related to that, is the one Julia came and asked. I'm interested in what the boundaries of citizenship are and its relationship to social cohesion, which is the main construct that groups in the bridge building and peace building fields aim to measure. So that's and I think, we certainly found measures that were trying to get at the ways in which and measure the ways in which people can relate to one another. Do they have the skills of conflict resolution or skills of facilitation or various kinds of things that might actually kind of relate to social cohesion? There's a couple of the values ones or believe sorts of parts of these wheels, which are, I think, about kind of open-mindedness or tolerance or various kinds of ways in which people might be more predisposed toward being able to build bridges and things like that. So I think we kind of we account for those things, but I'm not sure we yet necessarily, not through this report, that doesn't add up to kind of a theory about how those things are related. Is it more important to bring people together? Is that how bridges are built? Is it more important to inculcate these values and ideas? Are both of those things important? Are there other things? I mean, I think those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to lay the groundwork for, that people can be asking, through their measurement efforts and through other kinds of research.
Yep. Matt, I would actually put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you a question. I saw someone else mention it earlier, and I'm seeing it in several of the questions, and it all coming down to language. How do we define this or that? And you worked with Kristen Campbell and with Pace around the language project. So if you can brief us on that, our participants on that, because I think language is so important and definitions are so important, and you can't get accurate data if you don't have the right term, the right phrase, and stuff like that. So I want to put you on the spot.
No, you're right. That's a terrific study, and maybe John Kilcoyne, maybe you put the link in the chat or something. He just did it as I was speaking. So it's a great project where Kristen Campbell and colleagues kind of looked at the different terms and tested a whole bunch of different terms that we might use in this kind of broad civic sphere to try to see what they really mean to people, and in particular whether they're kind of weight or freighted, with assumptions. I mean, is this a term that people on the right use, or only people on the left, or a person on the left thinks of that only as the right thing? So those are it was very interesting, and it found that, yes, absolutely, some of these terms really telegraph a kind of a political orientation whenever you use them. Others don't seem to telegraph that, but they are just simply undefined, that people don't really know. And I think civic was one of these words that people don't know what civic is, which is not necessarily a reason not to use it, but it's a reason to kind of help people define it, to give it meaning, and to help people define it, for themselves. And I know a lot of you on the call are actually doing this sort of work in various ways. So I think that's part of it. And again, that's the kind of thing that might be that might be an interesting part of doing this work in a community is because it would force you to kind of look at the labels people are using for the work that they're doing, look underneath them and figuring out, what exactly is this work? How is it maybe different from or similar to work being done in another part of the community with a different label? I mean, that would be a very interesting exercise in and of itself.
I'll +1 the PACE language survey. It is an incredible tool. You can play with it and take different dimensions and cut the data by urban, rural, and college educated, not college educated, but by race, by religion, by ideological affiliation, and you can even cut it 3 different ways. And so, yes, I personally have been playing a lot with that tool because there's some fascinating things that emerge, and I think assumptions that we make about language that that study challenges a little. Example, for me, I was surprised. I don't know why I was surprised, but I was surprised that when they looked at the terms that most of the different groups that were in the survey thought positively about, that liberty was one of the top positive terms. And at the same time, liberty is something that is the big subject of debate. So it was then interesting to dig in and see, okay, well, who views that as a positive, and is it certain combinations that it becomes an issue? So I encourage people to play with that, especially if you're interested in the language aspects.
Absolutely. Jeff, Joe, but I'm just looking again at our lengthening list of questions and comments in the chat. A couple people ask about kind of whether there are tools that are measuring kind of the impact of things like candidate debates on high school and college students, and I think and how those experiences affect students. Yes, I think we found some of the things like that actually kind of were first of all, asking students kind of about different civic experiences they had or hadn't had, and then also kind of comparing that to their attitudes and their level of knowledge. So that, and then another question that's similar, kind of specific schools specific skills, that schools could be developing in students that would prepare them to be citizens. I mean, I think, yes, we found lots of examples of people trying to measure various different kinds of schools. I think though, kinds of skills. I think though that there's this kind of prior question, you mentioned it earlier, Debbie, in the presentation, is like, okay, you first have to try to understand and clarify what do you mean by, what does it mean to be a good citizen? That is something that clearly is, a moving target right now. I mean, not only, we've had a pandemic, we are living in an era of polarization. We are living in the midst of dramatic technological changes. There's all kinds of ways in which the kind of citizenship, the skills and knowledge people need, there's all kinds of ways in which that has changed and is changing. And so I think that is one of the big tasks we're going to be taking on in the next phase of this work is like, okay, what do we mean now? I mean, when you look at all these tools we've gathered, they just certainly do kind of, there's many more pins and the things that are basic knowledge. Do people know that there's 3 branches of government? And things, kind of basic civic duties like voting. Okay, those things are absolutely important, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff too. And to what extent is our vision of kind of the citizen of today, how is that changing? And that's the kind of question one needs to answer and can answer at many different levels. And that's the question you need to answer in order to kind of really move forward with what you're trying to measure.
Yeah, and Matt, I will point out something, because I'm following the chat, and Harry Boyd has mentioned several wonderful things, and one is agency in general. I mean, you can't, if you don't have agency to do something, those skills that are taught will not be used. So, you have to have that agency, you have to have that opportunity. And there's not only generationally, but, ethnically and racially, a lot of people don't have that agency. So we need to, instill that at a very young age, and in combination with those skills, to actually ensure that our democracy continues to thrive and that our individuals can become quote unquote citizens and good citizens. So I just want to point that out because I saw Harry mention that several times.
And Harry would probably go ahead, Joe.
No, I was tracking some stuff on the chat too, and I saw that one. Good point, Jeff, about agency, and thanks, Harry, also for pointing that out. And I think for me, it just relates to, you know, maybe have a bias towards this, or, you know, it's definitely informed how we have done measurement work, which is this notion that you can't really, in my opinion, measure an individual's civic engagement level, whether it's readiness or activity or action taken. You can't separate that from their context.
Right.
And so, you know, what is the context that you are living in, that you are acting out, that you are existing as an engaged person, engaged citizen? And you know, it's a whatever mutually reinforcing relationship, right? And like Jeff said, if you could be very, very well prepared, and if you don't believe you have you know, that efficacy, you may not get engaged. And if there are opportunities, right, that you see as meaningful, right, and you know, you're not going to be engaged. So, you know, I think thinking about both sides of that and how measurement can drive that, you know, or help inform that growth is really important to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can't, it's increasingly clear, I think, that these circles need each other. You know, you can have civic opportunities that you're putting out there for people who don't have the skills to participate in them. You can't just give people the skills and leave them with nowhere to go. That both of those things, I think, need to be kind of in balance. And it's hard to do that within any single institution, you know, a K-12 school system or whatever, a school or a university or whatever. It's much more important to think about that as what's in the larger community. What are the different ways people can learn across these different experiences they have in their lives, and what are the different ways that they can actually put that learning to use? That's an important piece of this. All right, what else? We only have like a minute or so here to go. Big things that we haven't hit. Somebody said this could be a conference in and of itself. Yes, you're right. I think there's and maybe this is a good.
Matt,
Yeah, sure.
just something in the chat. I think next steps. I think that's a great, Peter mentioned that. And what are the next steps for not only this report, but others? As you mentioned, this could be a conference, could be a month-long discussion.
Yeah. What? Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah. So some of the next steps involve taking this process that we just did to come to get to the report, and now using a similar process to answer some of these harder questions. And the first set of conversations we're going to be having is around this definition of citizenship. And I've been reading the chat, and a number of really good, you know, questions that people are asking about how we think about citizenship, who's included, who's not included. I mean, there is a lot for us to unpack if we're going to come up with a definition that is usable and acceptable and actionable, right, to as many people as possible. So that's a big step. And at the same time, we're going to be taking all of the dots that are on the various maps and developing a rubric by which we can understand whether these tools are actually providing the information and the data that we need to understand the element that it's being tagged to. And this big question that Jeff, Joe, Matt has been talking about, the two wheels. We all have, I think, views about the interaction between those two wheels. I think it's something that people bring into their conversations when we talk about how are things going in our democracy. It's something about the two wheels that people are really thinking about. But there really isn't much out there that we've been able to find so far that really studies that relationship. And there's a whole host of things that I think come out of this. We probably are going to need the help of a lot of people to develop some new tools and to do the research that's going to be needed to understand how they spin, how they line up, what is actually the relationship, and how is it actually working, to test some of our hypotheses. So those are some of the next steps. Timeline wise, there are things that we are trying to do now. There are things that are going to necessarily be pushed further out. But Matt and we're actually right now mapping out what those next steps are. And I'd encourage you, if you'd like to continue to be involved in this conversation, to go to the Citizens and Scholars website where we have the report, and you can sign up for updates, and we'd love to keep you engaged with us as we move forward.
We should have various kinds of opportunities for people in person, to kind of talk more about these sorts of things through the work of Institute for Citizen Scholars, also the NCoC, also the National Civic League, the organizations that are trying to, in general, in various ways, convene people. So be on the lookout for all of those sorts of things. And please kind of be in touch with all of us as you do your work. I mean, measurement basically forces people to define what they mean, and it carries with it the idea that the thing can be improved. So the point in the chat about democracy, I think what democracy, how that is defined, I mean, to me, these two wheels, civic readiness and civic opportunities, add up to democracy. And so this is a way of kind of helping people kind of reaffirm what that is, clarify what it means to them, and figure out ways to improve it in their communities around the country, and for the country as a whole. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing. Please don't hesitate to kind of spread the work that you're doing and connect with us about what you're up to, and we will kind of move forward in this big measurement task together. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be sending you a link with the recording and all kinds of other stuff. Thank you.